Good evening. Welcome to Empower You. I feel like I'm shouting tonight. I'm Betty Overstreet, the Executive Director of Empower You. Do we have anybody here for the first time tonight? No? Well, then I'm not going to go through all that spiel that I do because you already know everything. I do want to tell people online, though, that you can ask questions tonight. I'm not sure how you do that, but I think you can see it on the screen. All of our classes most of our classes are live streamed, so you can watch those at a later date. So if you know anybody that didn't make it tonight, there's a lot of important information here, so tell them to go back and look at it later. Rachel, our guest tonight, was on Brian Thomas this morning, and she was really great. So I know the people that aren't here are really missing out on some good information. Just to remind you, we do pass our buckets around towards the end of the class because we do run just strictly on donations, and we appreciate any amount of money that you feel like you can give. And Rachel, are you going to be taking questions during your presentation or after? Okay, so she will take questions at the end. So if you would just hold any questions you have, and when you do have a question, raise your hand. Wait for one of us to bring a microphone to you, so especially the people online can hear and everyone here in the studio can hear. Now I just want to go over our next few classes. On Thursday, we have DeWine's proposed gun legislation with attorney Sean Maloney. Sean was also on Brian Thomas's show this morning, and he gave a really good interview as well. So anything that you're concerned about of any laws that DeWine's thinking about passing, I'm sure you're going to want to be here. And Sean will take any questions that you have related to gun laws. He knows everything that's going on. And if you ever get into trouble and need anybody, he's a good person to call too. Next Tuesday, this particular person will not be here in the studio because he's a pretty important guy. We feel real lucky that we got him. But Dr. Robert Epstein is going to be doing a Skype class for us. And if you don't know who he has been before Congress. He's been on the Mark Levine show just on Glenn Beck the week before last. And he's also been on Tucker Carlson's show. He's the one who, I say blew the whistle, but I don't know if that's exact wording to use, about how Google influenced the election in 2016 and how they're going to come back and really influence it in 2020. So that's a class you're not going to want to miss. And then next Thursday, we have Chess, the Game of Kings. Do we have any chess players here? Oh, a few. Well, I don't play chess. I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to be here, and hopefully I'm going to learn about it. One of the things I did learn already some time ago, it had something to do with politics, and I don't know how that is, but I'm kind of anxious to know how chess plays in politics. Next, I'd like to have Dan, who's the founder of Empower You, come up here, and we're going to give away our door prize. So pull out your tickets.
And can we ask our guest to draw a lucky number? And that lucky number is ending in 111. The person who just walked in the door, come on forward. We're going to make you come up for this one. Sorry. Because this one's complicated. This is a you pick one. We've got two books that, gosh, are on my list. One of them is Mark Levin's book, Unfreedom of the Press. You don't even want to know about the second one? Okay, all right. Okay, and your name, ma'am? Gabrielle, let's give her a round of applause. I didn't get this book to give away because of necessarily the Trump part. I think Bill O'Reilly's a great writer. I don't know how many of you have read any of his books, but they have kind of a way of sucking you in, and this will be seen in a future class. So just a couple things before we get started tonight. How many of you live in Hamilton County? A lot of you live in Hamilton County. Just really disappointed in the commissioners that after promising us that the sales tax for Union Terminal would go away, promising us over and over that it would go away after 5 years, they just went ahead and just said, no, we're going to keep it. You guys just aren't taxed enough. Really disappointing. A couple of my friends and I have been kind of tweeting around some fun songs to kind of let them know how we feel. I guess one of our favorites is You Won't Get Fooled Again. There's some other ones. If you think of any, let me know and we'll get them out there. Hopefully somebody will protest the action, because just the action itself needs to be protested. We also found out today that for those of you who live in Hamilton County, that the Port Authority, which has almost godlike powers to do anything they want without anybody knowing about it, has decided to grant FC Cincinnati no sales tax, no property tax in Hamilton County, which means that everybody else gets to pay a lot more, which is really sad. I know we're getting a big school tax levy in our area. I know there's several on the ballot, and ours is maybe it's needed. I don't know, but it's just disappointed to know that certain people don't have to pay property taxes and other people do. That's sad to me. Sean Maloney's kind of become our gun expert. He is the gun expert in the state of Ohio. If you are a gun holder, if you have your permit, you should come Thursday night, because he's going to walk through Governor DeWine's list of 16 ideas about what can be done to improve gun safety in the state of Ohio. Some of them very controversial. Some of them could impact you without you even knowing about it. So make sure you tell your friends on that. I wanted to let you know that we have an addition to one of our classes, the class I'm going to be doing about the debt and the deficit on November 12th. My friend and a friend of Empower You, Jack Atherton, who used to be on Channel 5 and also Channel 3, will be joining us that night at the beginning of the class to let us know what he's been up to. Jack's a great guy. I look forward to seeing him. Let me introduce you to the team. Joe Platt back there was very instrumental in getting this class going. Joe, raise your hand. Let's thank Joe. We've got our sound engineer, Jay Grenke, back in the back. Let's thank him. Betty Overstreet, our executive director. And Bill Roll, our treasurer. Let's give Bill Roll a round of applause. Hey, Jay, can you bring up the Empower You website real quick? The Empower You website. And I just wanted to remind people of one thing real quick before we get started. And Jay, could you go to the bottom of the page, please? So all our classes, you can rewatch them. So I just kind of wanted to remind everybody of that fact, and to rewatch a class, the old classes that have taken place. So these are 2 classes that took place last week. If you hear somebody say they didn't get a chance to come, or you had a good time, you enjoyed it, if you just go down to the bottom of the page, and all you have to do is click that link that says to view a complete recording of the class, click here. And I didn't get a chance to say hi to all of our people on the internet. I think we have 11 or 12 so far tonight, which is great. Thank you for joining us. So let me introduce our guest, Rachel Grenzler. She's a research fellow at the Grover M. Herman Center for the Federal Budget at the Heritage Foundation, where she focuses on retirement and labor practices such as Social Security, disability insurance, pensions, and workman's comp. Rachel and I are just so appreciative you decided to come here tonight instead of staying home and watching that debate, right? Before joining in Heritage in 2013, Rachel was a senior economist on the staff of the Joint Economic Committee of Congress. She completed her graduate studies at Georgetown University, where she earned a master's degree. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Mary Washington. She's a former Heritage intern. She grew up in a small town in Western New York, and she currently resides, gosh, you're right in the middle of the swamp, right? Bethesda, Maryland. We really appreciate you coming. We appreciate very much Stephanie Cruz, who has been coming to Empower You for a long time, helping to arrange this class. Let's give Stephanie a round of applause. And Rachel, come on up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you so much for having me. I was so excited when somebody asked me to come talk about pensions. I said, yes, I'll go there in person. I don't care if I have to fly. I've been studying this issue for a while now, and it originally came to me when I was working in the Senate for Senator DeMint, and he was wanting me to look across the states in kind of this notion of there's the good states and the bad states, the rich states and the poor states, based on the policies that they're enacting. And I quickly realized that one of the biggest issues was pensions and the level of underfunding that a lot of states have in their pension systems. And this has been, of course, developing over decades, but it's finally coming to bear in states' budgets, and they're having to do things like raise taxes, not spend as much for their schools and infrastructure projects because the pensions are consuming so much of their budgets. But this is also a private sector pension issue on the union side. And so multi-employer pensions are union-run pension plans. There are roughly 1,400 of them across the US. And so in this area, you might be aware of coal mining unions or trucking or construction. And so a bunch of employers will pool together under one union, and they all share a pension plan. The notion behind this is it's kind of a security, a safety net, so that if one employer goes out of business, then the plan is still there, the worker doesn't lose their pension. And also if you're jumping from one employer to another throughout your career, you have the benefit of being able to stay in the same plan. So there was a reason why these were developed. The problem was that when these plans were enacted, and when we started governing them and setting the rules for these plans, is that Congress created separate rules. Here's the rules for the single employers, and here's the rules for the union plans. The single employers, you have to properly fund your plan, you've got to use this discount rate. Basically, we want you to put the money there if you're gonna make the promise. For the union plans, you can do whatever you think is reasonable. And so as we'll see here, they didn't always do what is reasonable. In terms of pensions, when I'm talking to crowds in Washington and the millennials and younger generations, nobody really cares too much about pensions, and they think they've just kind of gone by the wayside, they're not gonna affect me. But then I say, this is a $30,000 to $42,000 per worker cost. If you add up all the underfunding between these union plans and the state and local ones across the US, and if Congress decides to bail them out, this costs every worker in the US between $30,000 and $42,000. And these are the workers that are having to save for their own retirement, save for kids' college, all other sorts of things. And we might be asking them to be paying for the pension benefit of their neighbor or their state and local government worker instead of having to fund their own choices that they want to make. So as I said, we have about 1,400 of these union plans across the US. They are collectively only 43% funded. So if you're in one of those plans, you can count on 43 cents on the dollar in terms of what you've been promised. The total price tag is $638 billion. And about 130 of these plans are considered critical and declining, and they basically have no hope of coming to solvency. They're digging themselves in deeper holes. But it's not just a problem of a handful of them or 100 of them. As you can see here, 96% of all people that have one of these union-run pension plans are in a plan that's less than 60% funded. So it's not something where we can just address one or two plans or even a couple dozen and say, okay, we fixed the problem. It's all of them. So whatever we do sets the stage for 1,400 plans instead of just a couple. So what went wrong? Why was this even allowed? As I mentioned before, we have separate sets of rules. There's the union plans and there's the single employer private sector plans like your GE or your one company that has a plan. And we've largely just said, you can do what you want. It's the same thing that happens at the state and local level, is that you have politicians that are running these plans and making the promises, and they have all the wrong incentive. They want to promise higher benefits in the future because that's a way that they can avoid paying higher wages and other things in the near term, and it just pushes the problem onto the next person who's elected, or in these union run plans onto the next employer. And while the union-run plans do have equal representation, so they have employer representatives and they have union representatives, if you're part of a plan that has 300 employers participating and the employers have 3 representatives, you don't really have much say in what happens in the plan. It's largely the union trustees that are the ones running the plans, and these trustees are not actuaries that know the finances behind pensions. They're just union officials. And so it's pretty easy to see why this problem developed over time. There's also an interesting case with the Teamsters is one of the largest pension plans. Its unfunded liabilities are close to $40 billion. Well, this plan was involved in the mafia. It was investing its pension assets in Vegas casinos. It was under federal oversight of its pension for more than a decade. And these are the plans that we're talking about having a federal bailout so that they can keep paying 100% of the promises that they made. Another problem there is that while there are some rules, Congress has passed different legislation that basically says once you get so poorly funded that you're in this critical and declining status, you don't have to follow the rules at all. They don't really make them follow the rules to begin with, but then once they get into that really bad state, they say, it's okay, we're not even gonna attempt to have you follow those rules anymore. You can stop funding your plan. Basically, you can do whatever you want there. So what happens if you're in one of these plans? And this has happened to a couple dozen plans over the course of history. It's not something that's unprecedented that a plan would fail. And so Congress did establish in 1974 something called the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. This is a government entity, but it's not a taxpayer financed entity. So it has no authority to use federal revenues to pay the pension insurance. But what happens when a plan goes to the PBGC is that they get a reduced benefit if you're a multi-employer plan. For some people, it actually is 100% of the benefit, but as you can see here, I set up an example. So what if you have a $20,000 pension that you were promised? Well, when your plan fails and you go to the PBGC, you'll get about $13,000 per year. The problem is that because all these plans are failing, even the government insurance entity that's supposed to protect them is also failing. When these plans come in, they will so overwhelm it. They're primarily 2 big plans that will become insolvent over the next 5 or so years. And when they become insolvent, the PBGC just won't be able to pay out the benefits. They'll only be able to pay out about 10% of what they've insured. So think if you had your auto or your health insurance and all of a sudden they said, well, we can only pay you 10 cents out of what we're supposed to, and then you're on the hook for everything else. So that's what's happened here. This is clearly unfair. These workers thought that they were gonna have this pension, or at least this pension insurance in retirement, and now it's not there anymore. But this has happened in the past, and plenty of plans have failed, and there have been reduced benefits. The one positive thing for workers who are in a union-run plan is that they at least have Social Security. There's a kind of backstop there. If you're in a state and local plan, there's a good chance that you don't have Social Security, and you don't have a PBGC, and so that's a bigger problem. So what has Congress been doing about this? It's not a very well-known issue, and I'll go up to the Hill to talk to offices and staff members quite a bit, and it's just not something that a lot of them are aware of. And so unfortunately, the unions have been able to dictate the narrative on this and call these proposals that they've come up with something that they're not, saying that they're safe and secure loans, saying that they're shoring up pensions, that they're keeping promises to workers, when really they're taxpayer bailouts. So there was a committee that was established last year. They met for about 6 to 9 months. It was called the Joint Select Committee on the Solvency of Multi-Employer Pensions. They came up with a proposal, got leaked to the press, and then the unions on both sides didn't like the proposal, and so they never actually reported it out. Whether or not that was a good or bad thing, I don't know. There were some marginal improvements in there, so they were at least doing some things like saying, hey, you can't assume an 8% discount rate that lets you put in half the money that you really need to put in. They edged that down, but they did it only a tiny bit compared to, well, we really need to be at more like a 4% rate of return if you want to be sure that your money is going to be there in retirement. So that report didn't happen. There is legislation that when it was introduced, so it's called the Butch-Lewis Act in the Senate, it's called the Rehabilitation for Multi-Employer Pensions Plan in the House. And when this first came out, this is like the left's dream. It's basically 100% bailout. And so I thought, there's no way this is going anywhere. You know, this is just like giving all these plans a direct pipeline to the Treasury and saying, take whatever you need. The money will keep flowing. You can even increase your promises. Money will still be there. So I thought there's no way this is going to pass. And yet a version of this just passed the House in July with 29 Republicans signing on to it. And so that's very worrying to me. And I guess there are just enough constituents across the country. There are about 10 to 11 million people who have these plans, and they're loud and they're active and they come knocking on Congress's door. So this plan passed. What's in that plan? There's two different parts of it. So we have all these underfunded plans. This particular act in the House, HR 397, is targeting only about 139 plans. That's just chosen, I think, so that they could limit the cost of it. So the cost there is roughly $100 billion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. And we're talking about 139 plans. This is only 10% of the plans that have trouble. What it does for those plans is it says, okay, you have no hope of getting out of this situation. You're digging yourself in a deeper hole. We want to give you loans, but clearly it won't look good if we give you a loan and you have one active person paying in for every 12 people that you're paying out. Taxpayers are going to realize that this isn't a safe and secure loan and that it's not going to get paid back. So first, we're going to give you a big chunk of cash. You can use that cash to keep paying 100% of your benefits. And then you're also going to get a loan. And we want you to take that loan and you can go ahead and invest it in the stock market. And hopefully you'll earn really high returns and you'll have a better chance of being able to repay that loan in 30 years. And over those 30 years, we're going to give you a subsidized interest rate and only interest payments on the loan. And at the end of 30 years, if you can't repay it, we'll either give you a deal or we'll forgive the loan. So in the end, you have a package that addresses 10% of the plans, costs $100 billion, and the CBO reported to Senator Enzi in a wise request that he made. And they said, under this proposal, about a quarter of the plans will still become insolvent before the 30 years is up, and almost all the rest of them will be insolvent within the decade to follow. So you've given $100 billion, and all you've done is kick the can down the road, and you haven't done anything for the other 90% of the plans. And you've opened the door to a bailout of state and local plans. The private side is about $638 billion. State and local plans is anywhere between $4 and $6 trillion. And if we don't think that Congress is going to be sympathetic to firefighters and teachers when they've already opened the door to private workers, private sector workers, who are we kidding here? I mean, you do it for one, and we're going to have to do it for everybody. And that's where you get to something that could cost up to $42,000 per worker in the US. So there's that bill that has already passed the House. It has not passed the Senate. And I don't think the Senate is inclined to take it up, but then we've heard recently, and we are worried about, the administration would really like to pass a trade deal, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, or the USMCA. And there is concern, and we've heard from people in Congress and the administration that potentially something could be given on the pension side in order to get the trade deal through. So at first I thought this would be what's already passed, the House's Multi-Employer Pension Act. Just on my way here, when I got off the airplane, I had some emails. The Senate is going to be hotlining something called S27, a mine workers pension bill. What that does, the mine workers are unique, and this was one of the first plans that came to Congress asking for a bailout. They'll be insolvent in about 2022. They're the ones that, like I said, they've got one person paying in for every 12 people that are retired. So what the Mine Workers Pension Protection Act, there's different versions of it, but basically it would extend an existing bailout that Congress has already given to the mine workers for their health benefits only. It said you can use the interest on this mine fund. And then after they did that, they said, oh, that's not enough. And then they gave them a taxpayer bailout, access to additional funds. So they're already getting a bailout for their health funds, but never before in history has Congress done anything to provide a bailout for private sector or state and local pensions under the Miners Protection Acts, which haven't passed the House, but they've gotten to mark up there. It would just address this one plan, the UMWA, United Mine Workers of America. they have about $6 billion in underfunding. So this is roughly 1% of the total amount of underfunding that's out there. They can disguise it first by saying the money's coming from the AML, this Abandoned Mine Land Reclamation Fund. It's not actually. They've already used all that money for the health benefits. So every dollar of it will come from taxpayers, up to $750 million per year for one plan. And they call this a coal miner worker bailout. And certainly there's a lot of sympathy for coal miners. I mean, these people did really hard work for years. They have health conditions. And the one thing that they had going for them was, at least I'm going to have this safe and secure retirement, and I'm going to have my health benefits. They worked hard to provide for their families. The problem is their union wasn't actually representing them well. That union did things like, as soon as the plan was set up, they paid out benefits to retirees that never paid into the system. You know, they just, from the beginning, bankrupted it and put these workers in a really tough situation. And so this is hard. You know, you don't want to tell somebody who is in retirement that has health conditions and costs and can't pay their mortgage without their pension that they don't have it. And the union is telling them, the government made you a promise. They refer back to some historical act, the Krug-Lewis Act of 1946, because Congress did at one point step in and take over the coal mines briefly during the war, and they wanted to ensure that the production was going in. And as part of that, they helped them set up a pension system. So the union tells the workers, the government's in charge of your pension. It's not. All they did was help in the negotiations to say, hey, a pension can be part of it. But they walked away. You know, the government has never had a seat at the negotiating table ever since 1946. They didn't even have a seat negotiating then, other than to get coal production continued. But the union has successfully told their members that this is a government promise and that Congress is responsible for keeping this to you, when they've been the ones that decade after decade have seen what's happening. You know, the coal industry is declining, people are going out of business, and yet they're doing nothing to sufficiently increase their funding of their pensions. So this is the bill that now I'm worried maybe that's going to be what's tied to the trade deal, and they'll address it for the coal miners. And this is a sympathetic group among the administration also. You know, they're very supportive of Trump. So that's another fear. And the problem is you can't just do it for one. Would that be fair for Congress to say, just you coal miners, you're the only ones, we're going to do it for you, and then we're going to stop? You know, they're not going to. And so if you open the door to one plan, you're opening it to 1,400 plans, and you're also opening it to $4 to $6 trillion in state and local pensions. And while it's unfair that these promises were made to the workers, that's not fair to every other worker that didn't have a pension, that is having to pay for their own bills, pay for their own mortgages, save for their own retirement. And it's just not something that we can afford, particularly given our debt levels now. So what can we do? You know, if you're not for protecting pensions, certainly don't want bailouts, what can we do? Oh, sorry, I skipped over one there. So first, we just recognize, like, there is no way, you can't make the money come out of thin air, and that's the problem with the proposals that are out there, is it's like, this is a fix to the pension system. It's not a fix to steal money from one group of people and give it to another. And so there's got to be some losses here. It's not fun, but there's just no way to have everybody be made whole. It's the unions and the employers that broke these promises. It's not taxpayers, and it's everybody, as I said. We can't just address the mine workers or add the Teamsters on later. You've got to do the same thing for everybody to be fair. And we have to avoid opening the door to doing this for everybody, including the state and local plans. So I mentioned the PBGC before. That's the one piece of this equation that Congress actually has a role in. They have authority over the PBGC, they set it up. No, you as taxpayers are not responsible for it, but Congress, I think, does have an obligation to at least ensure that this safety net that they set up for pensions is there. So that should be the first priority. And then if you're going to address this, you need to fix the problem. Like, there was clear reasons why this problem developed and is continuing to grow year after year. And actually, I'll add to that, there's, as I said, it's pervasive and it's getting worse. Some estimates from a professor that has looked at all these pension funding said that plans would have to increase their funding by 54%. And these are a lot of blue collar workers. And in some cases, the employers are already paying in $10 to $15 per hour worked into a pension plan. And so think about those younger workers, and they're having that high of a percentage of their compensation go into a pension plan that's going to be bankrupt within a decade and can't actually pay them anything. It's a horrible deal for them. So you've got to fix that problem going forward so that this doesn't just happen again. And then third is, how do we address this huge shortfall that's already sitting there? Whatever you do, you still got a $638 billion pot of money that was promised that's not going to be paid. How do we make sure that people get at least a big portion of their promise, and then we're doing this in an equitable way that doesn't just penalize younger workers and keep 100% for the older workers? So first, with the PBGC, it has about a $54 billion shortfall, but the way that Congress measures this is only over 10 years. So it only includes the next 10 years worth of plans that'll become insolvent. All those that are outside that window are not actually calculated in. But there is math. It's kind of simple. You know, you need to do things. You need to make the PBGC function more like a real insurance plan. Right now, you would laugh if you went in there and saw how this works. First of all, it's an entity that's supposed to run an insurance plan, but it has no authority to do anything, to set the rates or any of that. They have to go to Congress, and we know how quickly and frequently Congress acts on these things. Up until a couple years ago, the plans were contributing $7 or $9 per year per participant. That was their premium for the union plans. Single employer plans were paying up to $600 per year per participant. And there's a reason that the single employer plan for the PBGC is completely funded. And when those plans fail, they get up to $60,000 per year in benefits compared to the union plans that's not funded to begin with, and where you only get about $13,000 per year. So you need to make it function more like a regular insurance company. You could easily have done the math. You raise the premium that they're charging now, which is $29 per year, by threefold. And then you also have a variable rate premium, so that if your plan is 20% funded, you don't pay the same premium as the plan that's 100% funded. You need to pay more so that you have the incentive to not underfund your plan to begin with. There's also some things that just make sense to enact as part of good policy and to have the right incentives for those trustees. So right now, if you're in a union plan and your plan fails, and you're one of those union trustees running the plan, you get to keep your job. And the PBGC just cuts you checks, money for what you need to pay out, and you just sit there and you take the money from PBGC and you give it to the participants. There's no reason that we need to keep paying union trustees to cut those checks. You know, in the single employer plan, they don't do that. The PBGC steps in and they take over. It's pretty simple at that point. You know what the benefits are supposed to be. They don't change from year to year. And so we need to cut those out so that they can't keep their jobs after they've run these plans into the ground. You also should have the PBG step in sooner. Like the Teamsters plan, the mine workers plan, we know a lot of these plans have no hope of becoming solvent. You may as well stop the bleeding now, step in. They have, some of them have significant assets there, but if you implemented the PBGC's benefit reductions sooner rather than later, you could prolong the solvency of some of those plans, and some of them could even remain solvent for the foreseeable future. And then just implementing a standard PBGC eligibility age. You know, some of these plans, their workers might be eligible for retirement at 55, other plans it might be 65, and just good insurance practice is to price what you're selling based on, you know, the actual cost of providing that benefit. One other thing there that just would bring additional revenue into the system instead of going after taxpayers to shore up the PBGC, because you don't really need to. You know, you can get the money from within the system, is to, instead of calling it a reduction in benefits, you impose a stakeholder fee. And so the employers pay $5 to $10 per month, the union pays $5 to $10 per month per beneficiary, and then the workers and the retirees contribute $5 to $10 per month. These types of things put enough money into the system at kind of minimal impact to the individuals, and they could keep it solvent for the long run. So the second one, and I realize I'm going on here about a really boring topic, so if you do have any questions, feel free to interject now. Yes.
Perfect. Ken Bowman. Question. Are the workers on all these plans being communicated with? Is there a requirement that they know that their plan is being underfunded and by how much, so they can make some career decisions at this point, whether or not they want to do something different with their life or get an outside network marketing job or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not sufficiently, if at all. You know, I haven't seen the statements that come from the unions that they're required, and whether or not they even follow up on seeing if they're sending these statements. I've seen their website notices where they're saying things like, Congress is responsible for keeping its promise to you. And so maybe in some fine print somewhere, there's something that says your plan is only 23% funded, but no, I don't think they have any clue. You know, here's what we promised you. Here's what you get if it goes to the PBGC. Here's what you get when the PBGC fails. I have not heard of that anywhere. But that's a good point. That's something that would help people to realize this. And then they might be asking their union, or the state and local government workers might be asking their politicians, why aren't you funding our plan? What are you doing about it?
Question right here.
Diane, so this insurance organization, does it insure government pensions or just private pensions?
Just private pensions. Yep.
And could you tell me who's on the PBGC board?
It's not a board, so they have a director, and then it's just government employees that are working there. But as I said, their problem is they can't operate it like an insurance company. So they're collecting the information. They can make projections and know when certain plans are going to fail, estimate what the benefits are going to be going out the door, but they have no authority to run it.
Tom, I see you've got that standard eligibility age. Is there any thought being given to raising that age in some kind of reasonable but gradual fashion? Because, and related to that, of course, is how much is that really one of the contributors? I mean, you know, 50 years ago, life expectancy was vastly less than it is now. And so is there really any solution if we don't do something about the age? I mean, 65 is no longer old like it used to be.
Right.
My grandfather was an old man when he was 65, and I hope no one calls me an old man, but I'm well over 65 now.
Right. When Social Security first began, the life expectancy, I believe, was 72, and now it's 17 years later. And so, yes, that's a great point there. And instead of having to just reduce benefits, I think that should be a plan that's available, or a tool that's available for the plans, and to put that up to vote to their members to say, hey, instead of having a 5% benefit cut, would you like to take your pension a year or two later and still have the same level? You don't get money for the current retirees. You know, you can't change their age when they're already starting a benefit, but certainly going down the road, this is something that should be implemented. One of the problems that state and local plans come up with is, depending on your state, it may be constitutionally prohibited to make any adjustments. So Illinois Supreme Court ruled that some of the minor adjustments they made to their pensions couldn't actually happen. The union sued. And so they've said that if you just started the job yesterday in Illinois, we can never in the future change any single part of your pension. We can't ask you to contribute another penny. We can't change your retirement date by 1 month. We can't change the amount. We can't change your COLA, nothing. And so that's where you make it really hard, is because you lock in these costs that are going to be 40 years in the future, and there's nothing you can do about that. Yep.
Well, Frank, just one question about the calculated rate of return. That has a significant effect on what the future benefits can possibly be. Is there any way that these trustees know or choose that rate of return that's fixed by the PBC or something like that? So,
on the single employer side, yes, it's fixed by the PBGC. So they have to use a kind of conservative rate. It's around 4.5%. It's a mix of high quality corporate bonds, something that makes sense. So the whole thing here is, with pensions, you are promising somebody a certain benefit in retirement. And so, as economists know and would say, you have to use a discount rate that is riskless. That's close to US Treasuries, which now are closer to 3%. But on the multi-employer, the union-run side, they consistently use 7 to 8%, saying that historically this is what stock markets have returned. If they're getting that rate, then it's okay to keep using it. The problem is they weren't, and they kept accumulating unfunded liabilities, and they never fixed it going forward. And as you pointed out, it's very simple to just say when you're making a negotiation, well, we can't increase your pay. Our employers are too pressed already. They can't afford anymore, but we're going to raise your pension or we're going to raise your pension that you get in retirement. You won't have to save as much on your own, but then they don't actually make the employers put any more in. You just tweak the discount rate and it looks like you're giving them a higher benefit, but you've just assumed that they're going to get a higher rate of return.
Question right here.
Lou, are these plans gradually changing over in the future to 401k kind of plans? Or are we never going to fix the problem because people are going in a plan that is known to fail?
Unfortunately, they're not changing over. The ones that are in the unions will never go to defined contribution plans because that's one of their biggest negotiating tools and one of the things that they can take to their members and say, look what we got you. A little bit on the state and local side, but again, you have the government unions that oppose defined contribution plans because they think that it's safer and that individuals don't have the capacity to invest on their own. But when you look at 42% funded, state and local 35% funded, I think most individuals could do a lot better on their own. Let's do one more and then I'll get back to some of the solutions here.
Hi, I'm Linda. I suspect theft. And when you say don't pay the union people their fees for distributing checks on underfunded plans, I don't know what kind of money those guys are making, but they're making a lot of money. I'm thinking that's why you mentioned it. So how much of the missing money has been stolen? How much of it's been stolen? I mean,
well, we don't know that, but
But you
yes, you
suspect-
bring up a good point, is that there is a lot of fraud and corruption in unions, whether it's the private sector or these state and local plans. We don't know what the level is. You know, there's dozens of cases and even one government employee union that I can point to where individuals have been convicted of fraud and abuse and laundering and all sorts of types of things. And this is just kind of a pervasive problem with unions because they have a monopoly, particularly if you're in a forced unionism state. Workers have no choice but to join that union and to pay those dues. And there's just little to no accountability or oversight over how those funds are used. I don't think that $638 billion has been stolen, but certainly this is just a problem in the whole nature of what unions were designed to do versus what they're actually doing. And they're no longer serving the purpose that they originally did, which was to protect workers, to make sure that the safety is there, to get them fair wages and compensation. They had a role in that when they first were developed, but they aren't doing that anymore. And it's not something that workers really need.
Could I sneak one last question in?
Yes, please.
So is it heritage position, or do you have an official position that the government shouldn't fund these at all? It should just be strictly on the workers, or is it a partial? What do you recommend?
So no, taxpayers never had a seat at the table here, and they have no role in these plans, in the union plans, or, you know, state and local, you're already funding them to some degree. But I don't think that federal taxpayers should be the ones to step in and provide a bailout. And so no, there should be no federal taxpayer dollars given to private union plans, to private single employer plans, or to state and local plans. These are problems of their own making. That said, it's not just put all the losses on the workers. I think that there's a responsibility to put the right rules in place to try and minimize the losses going forward. And ultimately there needs to be accountability, because it was wrong that these employers and these unions were able to make these promises and not keep them for the workers. So that actually segues well into my second point here, which is whatever Congress does, they need to fix the problem. And that's what's wrong with the two bills that are in there now, is that all they do is give them money and they don't do anything to address what caused this problem. And by doing that, you just create the incentive for the problem to get bigger and bigger in the future, and for even more people to set up these types of plans, because why not if it's just a way to compensate your workers with taxpayer dollars? So to fix the problem, we talked about the discount rates. You need to use appropriate discount rates. It's an equation. If you promise this, you need to set aside this. It's very simple. You need to use a reasonable discount rate, something closer to the Treasury, and not let the plans decide what that rate's going to be. And the way that you can get at that is you can just say, hey, the unions can't collectively bargain the contribution rate. You can only collectively bargain one side of the equation because otherwise the equation is not going to match. And then you can use an excise tax that's going to prevent plans from underfunding. So the single employer through the PBGC, they actually tax them the amount of their underfunding if they underfund the plan. So if you don't contribute $100 million, you get a $100 million tax. It's a pretty easy way to just say you have to make your contributions. And then just requiring accountability. So this gets to your question. Right now, nobody's on the hook. And that's the problem. You have this plan that everybody pools into, and some employers can go out of business and leave their employees in the plan. And ultimately, it comes down to nobody's liable. And so you need somebody to be liable here. And whether or not you talk about piercing the corporate veil and making the trustees liable, things along those lines, is that somebody's got to be accountable. On that side, I wanted to note that recently one of the state and local plans, the St. Louis Firefighters Association, they got wise to what was going on. I don't know if they received a statement or not, but the city basically just said, hey, we're not going to make this $100 million plus contribution because our budget's too tight. And that's what routinely happens in state and local governments, is that's kind of the discretionary part of the budget. If you don't have the money there, you just don't fund it, and you hope that in the future you'll have the money, or that you'll get 10% returns, and that somehow it'll show up. And if it doesn't, it's not your problem, it's somebody else's 10 years down the road. Well, the St. Louis firefighters have sued the city to make the contribution. And I hope that that's the type of thing that will continue, and that other plans and people who have these pensions will realize it's not fair that the money's not being put there. It's basically like your employer not sending your paycheck, and that they will issue these lawsuits to kind of hold people accountable. Fixing the problem. Do I have more? There was something. Okay, so minimizing the losses, that's the last step. I said you address the PBGC, you set the rule state going forward, but then you're still left with this huge shortfall. So what do we do for the workers that say, I was supposed to get this pension and now it's not going to be there, or I'm only going to get 20 cents on the dollar? So there's something that Congress enacted called the Multiemployer Pension Reform Act that allowed plans to actually start reducing benefits and making some changes early. So under current law, you can't change anything, or under previous law, you couldn't change anything, and you just have to keep running the plan until it becomes insolvent. Well, this proposal allowed them to start making changes earlier. The problem is that Congress made the rules so tight that the plans couldn't qualify for it. Or you had an issue where the Teamsters, which is really the biggest plan that's causing these talk about bailouts, they actually made a proposal. And so they brought it before their members and they approved it. It was going to be up to 20% cuts in benefits, and it would have happened immediately. They submitted it to the Department of Treasury in an election year, with Obama not wanting to have said that pensions were cut. Treasury denied it. And the irony of why they denied it is they said that they were using unreasonable discount rate assumptions to prove that if they made the cuts, they could still be solvent within 30 years. But they were using the exact same discount rate assumptions that federal law allows these plans to use. Their own assumed roughly 7.5% rate of return. So they're saying your discount rate is unreasonable, and yet the law says you can use whatever rate you deem is reasonable. Had that happened, had that gone through, we might not be here today, because one of the biggest plans would not be consistently knocking on Congress's door and saying, we need you to do something about this. So easing the rules on that MPRA plan would, the issue here is not that the government needs to step in and run the plans, because these are private sector plans and they need to be responsible for them, but just giving them tools to make some changes sooner rather than later, so that you can protect particularly younger workers, or not have somebody that's getting 100% pension up until they turn 80 and then they get 10%. You know, it's a lot better for that worker if they get 70% throughout their retirement. And then some other things that would just make this a better choice for workers. So one of them is a buyout option for workers. As I talked about the younger workers here, if you're having $10 or $15 per hour of your compensation go into a pension that won't be there, you should have a choice. You might not be able to take $10 or $15 per hour and get it into your own 401k, but what if you could at least take 5? You know, doing things like this that just allow workers to have an option to get out of the system Another thing is tightening the liability rules for withdrawing out of a plan. So you can have hundreds of people participating in a plan, and there's a way that you can get out. It's pretty hard as an employer, but a lot of them want to get out because if you're paying $10 per hour, it's hard to keep that up. But just making those rules fair so that you're charging them the right amount, not too much, not too little. And then I would love to see legislation to prohibit pension bailouts. Fortunately, we have had legislation both in the Senate side by Senators Cotton, Toomey, and Young, and then just last week on the House by Representative Rooney. That's a no state and local bailout, including pensions, and it's saying, you know, this is the sense for us that the federal government should not use the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, or any other means to bail out these state and local governments. It would be great to also have the same type of legislation for the private sector side. And with that, I'll take questions. I have a couple other things if I need to pull them up, but yep.
Question right here.
You've mentioned using treasuries as a reasonable discount rate.
Mm-hmm.
When you or whoever calculated the shortfall, was the discount rate treasuries? And I'm wondering if treasuries is too conservative an interest rate.
So the $638 billion that I've quoted, that's actually a 2016 amount from the PBGC. There's a big lag in when we get this data. So it's probably, I would guess, over 100 or over $700 billion now. And that is using, it's either a treasury or it's the corporate bond yield. I think it is the treasury discount rate. The reason for using that when you're talking about a promised benefit in retirement is because it's supposed to be a sure benefit. You could use historical stock market returns, whether that's 6% or 7%, but if you use that, you're only saying there's a 50% chance that I'll be able to pay you this benefit or more. There's also a 49% chance that your benefit will be less. So you use a more conservative rate, and if you start to accumulate, if your plan becomes 120% funded, 130% funded by using that rate, then you can start notching down your contributions. But all these plans are roughly 40% funded, and yet they're still using a 7 and 8% rate of return. And that just kind of spirals over time because they're assuming I've got this huge pot of money that every year has been earning 7 or 8%, but really their pot is this big. And so they're also losing out on all these returns. It can vary by the plan, but I mean, typically they earn, it's pretty similar to what the average stock market returns are, 6%. In some cases, it's a little bit lower for the state and local plans because ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, has a very interesting report on this, and you will see that there's kind of targeted investments. And so they'll invest in this state or local fund, or maybe it's just a friend or a family member of the person running the pension that they're investing in a company, or maybe they're divesting from energy sector stocks, or maybe in one case, the teachers fund is pulling money out and firing a manager because he sits on a certain board that's more conservative. So that's a different set of issues there as to why state and local returns might be slightly lower on average. But in general, you can expect pension returns to be about what stocks return.
Can I kind of take a little gut check on where the crowd's at tonight? So raise your hand if you, how many of you are in favor of the federal government not bailing out any pension plans? Raise your hand. So I'd say, what would you say, maybe 60, 70%?
Oh, I think it's higher.
80%? Okay, good. Other questions for our guests right here? Say your first name.
Hugh, I'm looking at this and I'm hearing you talking about the union pension plans and civil pension plans. Nobody's talking about what the government's done to us on Social Security. They have been the same criminals that the union mobsters have been, and they're not looking at bailing out Social Security. So,
well, and that's what's particularly troubling to me is that we have Congress passing legislation to bail out private sector plans when they've done nothing to address the roughly $16 trillion shortfall that is in Social Security, and the fact that in just 15 years from now, it'll be insolvent, and everybody in this room will get a roughly 25% cut in your benefit. And younger workers and future workers will never see their full Social Security benefit. And so that's exactly the point here, is that Congress has some unfunded pensions of its own, and it should be addressing those first.
Dick, what is that Butch-Lewis Act, and how does that work?
The Butch-Lewis Act is very similar to the Rehabilitation for Multi-Employer Pensions Act that I described, except it covers all the plans. It doesn't restrict them to just that roughly 139, which is, I pointed out, was just a matter of making it look like this costs less than it actually does. So under the Butch-Lewis Act, they set up a new administration within the Treasury. It's called the Pension Rehabilitation Administration. That's where all the plans that are struggling go to, and they say, hey, I don't have enough money to pay benefits, or I'm going to be insolvent in 10 or 20 years from now. Can I get a big chunk of money so that I can keep paying 100% of benefits? And can I also get a loan so that I can invest that in the stock market and hope that I earn higher returns, and that over time, maybe I'll have a better chance of repaying this loan? And there's nothing done in those acts to address the problem. No constraints put on the plans.
I have a quick question on Social Security. The Social Security benefits are based on what the Social Security money is invested in, and that is government bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much of the debt that the government owns, of the 22 trillion, is actually owed to the Social Security group. But if the government goes bankrupt, let's say, who gets paid first? Is Social Security going to get their checks out first? Or is the banker in Tokyo going to get his money? Or is the banker, the 1 or 2 trillion that we owe China, going to get their money first? Who gets it first?
We don't know. And that's interesting, because as we have had these questions about whether or not Congress is going to raise the debt limit, that's come up. Should we prioritize how we make payments going out the door? I think that probably to keep our ability to borrow, Congress would pay the interest on our debt first. Social Security would probably be pretty high up there. You asked about the total amount of underfunding though. So Social Security has about a $13.9 trillion shortfall, but it also has $2.9 trillion that everybody owes to the program itself. And so it's roughly $16.8 trillion out there, because it's actually already contributing to deficits today. So every dollar that goes into Social Security today from a current worker immediately goes out the door to pay retirees benefits. But then we also start collecting the IOUs. Part of it, we're drawing down on that $2.9 trillion trust fund. So Social Security is already in the red. It's just that we have all these paper IOUs that we can have the authority now to trade in. Starting in 2034, we'll no longer have any of those IOUs to cash in.
And of course, many of the candidates in the debate tonight have just said, it's okay just to go ahead and print the money, right? So what the heck? Other questions for our speaker tonight? Back in the back. We'll take a question from our winner tonight. Say your first name.
I'm Gabrielle. The group that you referred to as
PBGC,
okay.
Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation.
Isn't there anyone in the country that they can get a best practice on, that they can look at their model and say, this is what we need to be doing? Because it's not that difficult to implement. When I say that, I'm coming from a state retirement system. That was very carefully monitored, what you put in your contribution, your employer's contribution, and, yeah. So the laws and all the percentages of funding, all that was very clearly monitored. So I just get shocked at, when I hear what you had to say tonight about the lax, corrupt, I guess there's other adjectives to say about it, but isn't there anybody in the country that's doing this right?
Yeah, and they probably have great staff there too that understand this, and actuaries. The problem is, what if you're an insurance company and you're going out there and you have this product, but Congress is the one telling you what you charge to all the people that buy the product, and they're telling you all the rules, and anytime you say, well, look, I need to make this adjustment, you have to go to Congress to get them to make any tiny little change. And so they're just completely separated. But do we have a good model? They actually do already within the PBGC. They have the single employer system, 100% funded, able to cover up to $60,000 worth of benefits. You've got things in place like that excise tax I talked about. You don't let the people that manage the plan into the ground keep getting paychecks from the PBGC to manage it going forward. You step in early if it's insolvent. And so they know what to do. The single employer program is doing fine, and those plans are well funded because of the rules. But the multi-employer plan is, whether it's unions negotiating for these rules, it's just not, I mean, it's not managed by PBGC itself. They can know what to do, and yet Congress can't do that.
It's ironic. We bailed out the auto industry, and now they're replicating that same bad behavior. And it just seems crazy.
Well, and ironic that the bailout for the auto industry, if you look at the dollars, it actually all went to the union's pension plan. If it weren't for the money that went to that pension plan, taxpayers wouldn't have lost any money on the auto bailout.
Here's another question.
Mary Ellen, I'm thinking about all the cities like Detroit and the small towns, and unfortunately I'm thinking about Cincinnati as well. And when a city, like happened in Detroit, in essence goes bankrupt, and they can't pay their pensioners, are you aware of any successful recourse taken to hold, for example, city council members to their fiduciary responsibilities, that people could sue in a class action or whatever? That, have you ever seen that where people have actually sued those who are responsible?
I don't know of any case in which that's happened and they've been successful at actually holding the people that made the promises that were broken accountable.
Anybody online who would like to ask a question, just put your mouse at the bottom of the screen and you can ask the question down there. Mr. Bowman has a question tonight.
First, thank you again for coming to Cincinnati and leading your small group of 6 children back home in Maryland. What age ranges are your children?
My children are 18 months to 11. They're my pension retirement security.
Gotcha, gotcha. On a personal family level, are there some recommendations you would make to all of us that to secure our own retirement?
Yes, don't count on anything that has been promised by either the government or your employer. I mean, ultimately, I think that everybody's going to get something from Social Security, but you're not going to know what it is. And that's the whole point. If you can't plan on it, that's not helpful. You need to know what you're going to have in retirement. A great thing that his technological changes brought about is that it's just easier to invest. You know, when Social Security started, part of the reason was because you actually had to go on to the stock floor to make a trade. It just wasn't accessible to the average person. Today, everybody can pull out their phone and instantaneously make trades, invest in a safe life cycle fund. I mean, there are more tools available, but certainly with my children, it's going to be starting about saving early and just getting those steps in. First job you take money out, because the sooner you do it, the more that money is going to grow over time. And I've even started with their college accounts, you know, showing them like, look, if you put it in early, look how much it can grow to over time. And so it needs to be something that individuals do on their own, but also just the empowerment that comes with that, I think is really important for people to see how much you can control and how much discretion you have, and that what you can do for yourself, and instead of having to count on the government or somebody else to provide that.
Rachel, we have a question online right here.
We have somebody listening online that is wondering if you've been following the situation with the state of Kentucky pension issue, which apparently is one of the worst in the country, and just curious if you have any comment on that.
Yes, Kentucky's unfortunately in very bad shape. I think their pension funding is in the 20%. And Governor Bevin, to his credit, has really been trying. It's just hard. You know, I think they enacted something and it's being challenged and scaled back. And these are just reasonable measures. You know, it's math and it's simple changes that make sense. You need to increase retirement ages, and you don't have to say to somebody that's 64, you got to wait 3 more years. You can do it to the worker who's 40 and say, you're going to wait 1 more year. The worker who's 30, you're going to wait 2 more years. Just common sense things, or maybe it's adjusting the COLA. So you don't guarantee a 3% COLA every year, but something smaller than that, using accurate inflation measures. I mean, there are levers that can make the pain of this very minimal, but that can make them solvent in the future. And the one thing I would say for all states recommending is at least giving workers an option between choosing the defined benefit plan and the defined contribution plan. And this is particularly relevant. Teachers, really anybody in the state and local system, younger workers don't step into that service. I don't think anymore, government service, thinking I'm going to stay here for 30 years and this is going to be my only job. I think they step in and say, oh, I might do this for 5 or 10 years and then go to another system. But they're disadvantaged because oftentimes you don't vest for 10 or 20 years if you're talking about teachers. And so even if they move from one state to another, all those contributions that their employers have been making on their behalf are gone when they switch jobs or change careers. But by giving them a defined contribution option to have a 401k instead of a defined benefit, they could have that to take with them going forward.
With the House bill that just passed, and then now it's the Butch-Lewis Act in the Senate, what's the chances that's going to actually pass in the Senate?
So the Butch-Lewis Act is fortunately not what is probably going to be brought up in the Senate in the next couple of weeks. And I don't think that that act will come to the floor in the Senate, at least I hope it won't. But I think that now there could be a good chance of the mine worker bill passing in the Senate. And the problem there is that it just opens the door for all the other ones going forward.
My name is Mel. First, you know, one of the biggest responsibilities of government is to protect us and to protect us from being cheated. And we're being cheated here. But are the laws that are currently in place, if they were enforced and somebody actually being responsible for them, do the job, or would new laws need to be created?
For these multi-employer plans, I think new laws need to be created. There's not protection for the workers in there because nobody really is held accountable to make sure that the employers and the unions that ran the plans keep their promises to the workers. So there needs to be a change in the laws.
Hi, I'm Scott. Thanks for coming. Could you comment on Ohio PERS?
I don't know that much about that pension system. Sorry.
It's okay.
Tom, yeah, when we read stuff in the newspaper, and certainly if we listen to any of these debates going on, all they're talking about doing, at least they take Social Security as an example, is raising up the benefits. They're not talking about anything that you've discussed. So what chance is there of anything really, I mean, what's the route to get people to start talking about the things that need to be talked about?
Yeah, I think younger people need to realize that it's something that's relevant for them. In Social Security, everybody's talking about, well, let's just, on the left at least, the debates are, what are we going to do to increase benefits for Social Security? And I actually do think that there is a case to be made for increasing benefits, particularly for lower income workers who are very reliant on Social Security. So what I would propose and what we have put together at the Heritage Foundation is raise the benefits for lower income workers, but reduce them for upper income earners, and then do the other common sense changes like gradually increasing the retirement age and using a more accurate inflation measure. And those things actually get you to solvency without having to increase taxes on anyone. The problem with the proposals that are talking about raising benefits is that they're also raising taxes. And if you're making $20,000 per year, paying an extra couple $100 is a significant hit, and that leaves you with less money. Maybe you can't afford your mortgage anymore. Maybe you're cutting back on groceries, or you can't fill that tank of gas. And so I think we need to be thinking about the people who are most burdened when we do raise the taxes in this situation.
Rachel, do you want to talk a little bit about the Heritage Foundation? And then I'm going to have Stephanie come up and talk for a couple minutes too.
Yep. So the Heritage Foundation, I first went there in 2002 when I was a grad student at Georgetown University, and they were kind enough to support me in some dissertation work I was doing on Social Security. But we are a free enterprise think tank located in DC. I think we have close to 300 staff total, but part of that is across the country. And then also we have a Heritage Action arm, which is kind of our lobbying side of the organization. We recently added the Daily Signal, which is our news media outlet. And we are committed to principles of free enterprise, individual liberty, and we do a lot of work, all different areas. You know, I'm in domestic economic policy, but we have a healthcare team, we have defense, we have foreign affairs. And so you can find all of our work at heritage.org and then also thedailysignal.com.
Is that where somebody would join at heritage.org if they wanted to?
If you go to heritage.org, you can easily become a member there. I don't know all of the details of our fundraising side, but I know that they will send you information, there are educational opportunities, and Stephanie can talk a little more about Heritage Action, and also we have our Sentinels program that has people across the U.S. that are engaged in the policies.
Let's thank our guests. What an interesting, interesting class tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so as was mentioned, my name is Stephanie Cruz. So I work for Heritage Action here locally in Cincinnati. I live about 20 minutes from here, and we are the sister organization of the Heritage Foundation. And so our job is to really empower local conservatives to really be able to take action on information like what you've heard tonight. So as Rachel mentioned, we engage in what we would call grassroots lobbying. So really it's just contacting your members of Congress and really getting in front of them about the issues that matter to those of us in this room. So making sure that voices are being heard on issues like the multi-employer pension crisis. So one of the things that we are watching very closely is what happens with the USMCA and whether something like, you know, a bailout would try to get attached to that, and being ready to kind of stand to fight something like that. So we have what's called the Sentinel program. There's no cost to join that. Anyone is welcome to join. You can go to heritageaction.com/sentinel and sign up. We do a weekly strategy call. We have it every Monday at 5:30 Eastern. We had it tonight because of the holiday. And so we're walking folks through kind of the inside baseball of what's happening on Capitol Hill, so you have the information as things are moving through kind of the legislative process, because things do change very rapidly in DC, making sure you have the most up-to-date and current information to contact your member of Congress, really be able to grow your skills and network as a conservative, whether it's how to network better, how to, you know, be up on the issues, how to really, I think, grow your influence, whether you want to kind of start out and write that letter to the editor for the first time, or maybe you want to learn how to tackle Twitter, really also building up some of those hard skills that help us be better advocates for the ideas that we believe in. So I'll be around afterwards. Feel free to snag my business card. Would love to chat further. And I'm, again, here a local part of the team of Heritage that's scattered across the country. So thanks, Dan.
Wow. Thank you very much. So what an interesting kind of specialized class tonight of things that we all have to look forward to. So I've been working on the class I'm going to be doing on November 12th, which is about the debt and the deficit. And in that class, I'm going to talk to you about some other little things on the horizon that are fun that we're going to be looking at, like reparations, like canceling student loan debt, like the Green New Deal. And it's funny that all these programs seem to cost about $30,000 taxpayer. And sooner or later, you get to real money. And it's really, really scary. So it's $30,000 for each person. It's like a magic number, kind of like the discount rate or whatever. But it was a fascinating class because that's just one more hurdle that probably when we woke up today, we weren't even thinking about, right? Maybe we don't want to think about it. But let's give Rachel one more round of applause. She was great. You were great. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope to see you all Thursday night at our session on gun legislation in Ohio. And then Tuesday night, when we're talking about bad government that I think Tom and a couple other people were talking about tonight, we've got one of the we've got somebody coming in to talk to us for the first 10 minutes. He's never been here before. His name is Matt Miller Novak. He's an attorney with the Godby Law Firm in downtown Cincinnati. He's going to tell us about one of the most egregious cases of local government accountability problems, kind of like somebody was talking about the city of Cincinnati, that he's ever seen, and it will be an interesting discussion. That'll be before the session on Google that people have been asking about for a long time. I hope you'll come. It's going to be a fascinating class. So have a good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.